I didn't expect the day David moved back in to feel strange. He came with a few boxes, a couple of bags, and that look he always gets when he's trying not to worry me. I told myself it was just excitement. He's my son. I've seen him grow up in this house. It should feel right. But right away, something was off. The living room felt smaller with him here. His stuff was everywhere, though I told him to keep it in his room. He smiled and said he would. I nodded. But that evening I noticed a pile of papers on the kitchen counter. Not bills or junk mail. These were forms, official-looking, stamped. I asked him what they were. He said nothing, just that it was paperwork for the house. House paperwork? I asked. What do you mean? He shrugged, like it wasn't important. I felt a tight twist in my chest. The next morning, Mike called. He's an old partner from the force. I hadn't told him David was back. You sure that house is still yours? Mike asked. I laughed it off at first. He's always been a worrier, but something in his voice made me pause. He doesn't ask questions unless he's seen a reason. I went to the papers again. There was a stack of documents I hadn't signed, but one line caught my eye. It said the house had been transferred to David, my son. I stared at it. My hand shook. I checked the date. Last week, a week ago, David had made it official. I didn't remember signing anything. I walked through the house that morning. The kitchen cabinets had been rearranged. My coffee mug was on the top shelf. My favorite chair in the living room had been moved against the wall. Nothing huge, nothing violent. Just changed, subtle. Enough to make me feel like a guest. David was cheerful. Dad, I thought we could organize things a little. I tried to smile back. I told myself it was nothing, just housekeeping, but I couldn't shake it. The house didn't feel like mine anymore, not entirely. That night, I found Emily in the hallway, my daughter. She looked uneasy. Dad, maybe you should check the papers, she said softly. I nodded, but she didn't elaborate. She left me standing there in the dim light. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. My mind raced. How could I have handed over the house without realizing it? Had I trusted too easily? The legal forms were clear, and David had that polite, casual smile when he told me it was all done. I felt the first real tickle of doubt. He wandered through the house in silence, noticing little things. Doors slightly ajar that I normally closed. A new lock on the side door. I'm a retired cop. I noticed details. Something was happening, but I didn't know what yet. By the time I went to bed, I felt a strange mix of calm and unease. The house was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I kept hearing the faint echo of Mike's warning. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something wasn't right. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the house, about David, about Emily, about Mike. I thought about trust. And I thought about how easy it is to think you know your own home and your own family until one morning you realize maybe you don't. I told myself it would all be fine. I had given David the house to keep the family together. That was the plan. That was the thought that kept me warm. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, that decision was the first step toward a future I wasn't prepared for. That's when I knew things were changing. And that's when I realized this was no longer just about moving boxes. It was about control, and I didn't know who was really in charge anymore. The first time I noticed things shifting, it was small, almost easy to dismiss. Laura had moved a few of my kitchen things, my coffee mugs, the spice rack, and set them on higher shelves. Just trying to make it easier to reach, she said, smiling. I nodded, telling myself I was imagining it. But the next day, the chair I always used in the living room was moved against the wall. My son was there, casual as ever. Thought it'd open up the space a bit, David said. I smiled. But inside, something tightened. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation. The rules started coming quietly. No more leaving the front door unlocked. Guests needed notice in advance. The thermostat was no longer mine to set. Everything, little by little, was being shifted. I felt like a visitor in my own home. I remembered when David was a boy, how he used to beg me to sit and play catch in the yard. Those days were simple. He trusted me. I trusted him. I never doubted we'd keep the house together. That trust felt solid. Now it wavered in ways I couldn't ignore. Laura was polite, always smiling, always helpful. She offered to organize the pantry, clean the closets, handle the bills. I thanked her. I thought it was a kindness. But the more she did, the less I felt like I mattered in decisions about my own house. David started staying later at work and bringing friends around without telling me. Not all at once, just subtle things. Plates left in the kitchen, music playing when I preferred quiet, small rearrangements of furniture. Each one felt minor, but when they piled up, they whispered a truth I didn't want to hear. I kept thinking back to the week we signed the papers. I had trusted him to honor the family, to keep things steady. I'd thought passing the house to him would bring us closer, would keep the family intact. I never imagined the comfort I expected could turn into a slow, quiet exclusion. The first real confrontation came over dinner. I had planned a simple meal, my favorite roast chicken, the one Emily used to love when she was little. Laura came in with a new set of rules. Dinner would be earlier now, and no second servings without asking. David just nodded and ate. I chewed slowly, trying to swallow more than the chicken. I tried to keep it light, joked about the new schedule, but the joke didn't land. Even my old friends noticed. Mike called the next day. "You sure you're still running things over there?" he asked, careful, not wanting to sound accusing. I laughed at first. Mike always jumps to worry. But the worry in his voice, it hit. He didn't say more, but I didn't need him to. I was starting to see it myself. The room started feeling foreign. My recliner had been moved to face the window, away from the television. The tool shed was organized without me. My own books were stacked differently. Every corner carried subtle signs that decisions were being made without me. I kept going through old photos, trying to remind myself of what we were, of the life we built together. David and Emily as kids, summer evenings in the yard, birthdays celebrated with too many candles on the cake. I wanted to feel grounded in that, to remind myself that our family was still a family. But the house was already changing beneath my feet. I tried talking to David about it. "It feels different here," I said one morning while he was drinking his coffee. He smiled, casual. "Just getting used to a few updates," he said. I nodded, but there was that knot in my stomach again. I wanted to believe him. I had believed him all my life. Emily noticed too. She hesitated in the hallway, glancing at me before going upstairs. She didn't say anything, but I knew she felt it too. The small shifts, the subtle rearrangements, the quiet rules. She didn't intervene, just observed. And somehow that observation made the house feel emptier. Even the mailbox became a signal. Bills addressed to David only. Letters for me delivered later, packages left in corners. Things I had overlooked before now carried a weight. Each little exclusion piled up. I didn't know when it started to feel deliberate, but it did. I spent evenings walking through the house, room by room, tracing the lines of change. Doors closed differently, windows opened differently. Even the light seemed altered, falling at odd angles on walls I knew too well. The home I had lived in for decades was shifting around me, and I had no part in it. By the third week, I started keeping notes. Simple things at first: what was moved, what new rules were set, what changes Laura made without mention. I wrote down dates, times, small details. It felt silly, almost obsessive, but I couldn't stop myself. Something was happening. I needed to understand it. At night, I sat in my half-lit living room, looking around. The chair I once claimed as mine. The rug I'd patched after Emily spilled juice years ago. The little dent in the hallway from when I tripped everything seemed off. The house belonged to someone else now. Not completely, not yet, but enough to make me feel a stranger. I realized then that trust, even long-held trust, can be fragile. I had invested decades of care, patience, and love into this home, believing my family would honor it. I still wanted to believe it, but I could no longer ignore the signs. And that's when I understood this wasn't about small rules or furniture placement. This was about control. The quiet kind that creeps in and makes you doubt yourself. The kind you notice too late. I started thinking about the papers, the signatures, the legal transfers, about what Mike said, about Emily's quiet looks, about the small, steady shift of power that had taken root in my own home. I began watching more closely, not accusing, not yet. Just observing, noticing who decided what, when, and how. It was subtle, like the slow change of seasons, but I was awake now. And that awareness came with its own weight. I realized, sitting there in the dim light, that my home was no longer entirely mine. And with that realization, I knew the next steps would have to be careful, measured, and patient. I couldn't rush it, couldn't act on impulse, but I could begin keeping track, begin noticing, begin preparing. By the time I turned off the lights, I felt the first true stirrings of unease. Not fear yet, just the awareness that something was happening, and I needed to understand it. Something in the house had changed, and I had to find out what before it went too far. I lay there thinking of the family dinners, the quiet evenings, the trust I had placed in my son and Laura. And I knew, without a doubt, that if I wanted to protect what mattered, I had to pay attention now. Every little detail, every quiet shift, every new rule. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt that knot tighten again. The house was changing. I could feel it. And I began to understand that this was only the beginning. I started realizing that this house, this family, would demand more from me than I ever thought possible. I didn't plan for the confrontation. I thought I had given my son the house in good faith, believing it would keep the family close. But that evening, as I walked into the living room, I realized something had changed. David was sitting in my chair, the one I'd claimed since the day I brought it home, reading through a stack of papers I didn't recognize. "Hey, Dad," he said without looking up. "You need something?" I froze. That casual tone, the way he spoke to me as if I were just a visitor, struck me harder than I expected. I cleared my throat. "I just wanted to check on the bills, see what's going on with the house." He finally glanced at me, eyes sharp. "The house?" he asked like I'd said something strange. "Dad, this is my house now." I felt a pulse of heat run through me. I wanted to laugh, to tell him it was my home for 70 years. But the words stuck in my throat. "Your house," I said slowly. "I signed it over, sure. But it's still home for me, isn't it?" He shook his head and went back to the papers. "Not really, the deed's in my name. Everything's under my control now." Laura appeared in the doorway then, carrying a tray of mail. She smiled, polite, calm, almost pleasant. "David, these need your signature," she said, handing over a stack of notices, bills, and statements. Every envelope, every line of print, bore his name. My name was gone. I scanned the top one, overdue taxes, utilities, even the mortgage statements. They were all addressed solely to David. I felt the room close in around me. My chair, my table, my bookshelves, they hadn't moved physically, but suddenly they belonged to someone else. My voice sounded small when I said, "I thought we'd at least discuss these things together." Laura's smile didn't waver. "We're just keeping things organized, Frank," she said lightly. "Makes it easier for David to manage." I looked at David. He didn't argue, didn't justify himself. He just kept flipping through the papers, pretending I wasn't there. That casual dismissal cut deeper than I expected. I'd raised this man, shared every scrape and lesson, and now I was invisible in the house I built. The first real proof of betrayal came when I checked the bank statements on my old desk. They had been moved to David's office corner in the living room. I went over them quietly, page by page. Automatic withdrawals for home maintenance, insurance, even my favorite newspaper subscription. All rerouted to accounts I couldn't access. I could feel my stomach twist. Emily appeared then, quietly watching from the hallway. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me with that mixture of concern and pity that always made me feel older than my 70 years. Finally, she said softly, "Dad, maybe they've changed some things without telling you?" I nodded slowly, realizing she was right. "Changed some things," I repeated, but it sounded hollow. "More than changed. Taken my control, my authority in my own home. It had evaporated piece by piece." That night, I tried talking to David again. "You can't just," I started. "I can, Dad," he said, cutting me off. "Legally, it's mine now. You signed the papers." I swallowed hard, my hands shook. I trusted him. I'd believed this transfer would bring us together, and yet, that trust had been repaid with cold formality and exclusion. Laura added, almost cheerfully, "We're just looking out for the family, Frank. You should feel relieved, really, less to worry about." I felt a rush of anger and betrayal I hadn't anticipated. Every meal, every conversation, every small decision I used to make in this house had been quietly taken from me. They were running my home without me, controlling my life under the guise of care. The next morning, I found more evidence. A voicemail on my phone from the bank, confirmation of account changes, all in David's name. An email from the utility company, notifying David of new automatic payments. Even the cable and internet, which I had managed for decades, had been redirected. Every line of evidence confirmed the same hard truth. My access, my voice, my rights, all gone. I tried to talk to Mike that day. He listened, nodded, and said nothing for a long moment. "Frank," he finally said, voice low, "you're not imagining it. That house isn't yours anymore, not in any practical sense." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him I still lived there, that this was my home, my life. But I knew he was right. That knot in my stomach tightened. The realization hit me in full. I wasn't just being ignored anymore. I was being replaced. I started pacing the house, checking each corner, each room. The kitchen cabinets, my own coffee mugs, now marked with David's initials. The garage, once my sanctuary, was organized under rules I hadn't agreed to. Even my study, my private space, was cataloged, labeled, and restricted. The weight of it all pressed down on me. I'd spent years giving, providing, protecting. I had made sacrifices to keep this family together. And now, all of it had been quietly transferred to someone else. Someone who hadn't even bothered to include me in the discussion. By mid-afternoon, I sat at the dining table, staring at the stack of legal papers, bank statements, and notices. Each one was a mark of what I had lost. I felt the sting of betrayal, deep and unrelenting. I had believed in them. I had believed in my family. And for the first time, I understood how fragile that trust could be when crossed with self-interest. I called Emily again, trying to find some anchor. She was hesitant, careful with words, but she confirmed what I feared. "Dad, they've moved everything. It's all David's now. Laura's been organizing it for him." I felt my pulse rise. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. It was deliberate, calculated. They had taken control, rearranged my life, my home, my authority. And the evidence was all there. I couldn't ignore it. That night, I sat in the living room, the chair facing the window, the one I had always used for my quiet evenings. It felt foreign. My house, my life, had been claimed without my input. And I realized with a chill certainty, I would have to fight to reclaim even a sliver of control. And it wouldn't be easy. I began to make a plan. Notes, observations, records of conversations, copies of letters, statements, receipts, every detail mattered. Every small piece of proof might become part of what I would need to confront this head-on. By the time I went to bed, the house was quiet, but the tension lingered. The betrayal was tangible, sharp as a knife. That night, I finally admitted it to myself. I wasn't just unwelcome here. I had been systematically edged out. And if I wanted to hold on to what was left of my home, my dignity, my family, I couldn't wait. I had to start paying attention, gathering facts, and preparing. I lay there thinking of the years I had devoted to this family, the sacrifices I had made, the trust I had placed in David and Laura. And for the first time, I understood the depth of what had been taken from me. That realization burned hot and clear. I didn't know yet how far this went, or what else they had planned. But I knew one thing with certainty: I could no longer stay silent. And that night, as the house settled into the quiet hum of the heater and the night wind, I made a decision. I would find the truth, every hidden move, every quiet deception, every document. I would uncover it all, piece by piece, until I understood exactly what I was up against. That moment, sitting alone in the dark, I felt the first real surge of anger, sharp and righteous. And I knew there was no turning back. The fight had begun. I called Mike first thing that morning. He picked up on the first ring, his voice still rough around the edges like it always was. "Frank," he said, "you sounded off yesterday. Something wrong." I hesitated, then told him what I'd found: the bills, the statements, the way David and Laura had quietly moved everything into his name. Mike was silent for a moment, then said, "You sure it's not just paperwork? You signed over the house, Frank. They're just running it now." "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "It's more than that. There are things that don't add up, bank letters I never saw before, statements that mention loans I didn't agree to." Mike growled softly into the phone. "Sounds like they're playing with fire, son. You need to check everything. Every piece of paper, every letter. Don't let them pull one over on you." After hanging up, I went through the stack of mail again. One letter caught my eye, a notice from the bank about a home equity line of credit. It was in David's name, but the address was mine. I flipped through the statement, noting transactions I hadn't authorized, transfers to contractors I didn't know, payments for improvements I never approved. I started keeping a notebook: dates, amounts, names, phone numbers. I traced every check, every deposit, every small withdrawal. Patterns began to emerge, quiet but unmistakable. Money moving out. Bills being redirected. My house being used in ways I had no say in. Laura was in the kitchen when I asked about it. She was cheerful, too calm. "Frank, everything's under control," she said. "David's just handling it. You don't need to worry." I didn't respond. Something in her tone set off a warning bell in my chest. It wasn't care. It was control. And it was deliberate. I called the bank next. After some back and forth with a customer service representative, I got a manager on the line. He confirmed my suspicion. The accounts had been moved to David's sole control. They had added him to the lines of credit, changed signatures, rerouted statements. Everything I once had access to was now locked out. I felt a chill. This wasn't a minor oversight. This was real, documented, and intentional. That evening, I went back through old paperwork, deeds, tax records, and previous bills. I compared them to the current statements. Subtle shifts became clear. The home had been leveraged in ways I never consented to. Assets earmarked for improvements or repairs were being used differently. Even some utility rebates that I had collected for years were now in David's name. Emily came by around sunset. She was quiet, hesitant. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, glancing at the papers I had spread across the table. "I'm finding things," I said slowly, not wanting to alarm her more than necessary. "Things that don't belong to him to move." She nodded, looking down. "I thought so. I saw some of it too when I was over last week. Didn't want to worry you before." Her words settled heavily in my mind. I began to understand that the situation wasn't limited to the house. It was spreading outward quietly under the surface. They weren't just taking control of my home. They were touching every corner of it, every asset, every account. I checked the voicemail on my old phone, multiple messages from the bank, all in David's name. Confirmations for new lines of credit, transfers, and mortgage adjustments. I felt my stomach tighten. Each message was a nail in the coffin of my old authority. Mike called again that night. "Frank," he said, voice low, "you're not imagining it. They're not just moving in. They're moving out with more than just furniture. You need someone on the inside, maybe a lawyer. Start keeping records of everything. Don't let them rewrite history without proof." I started assembling a folder, copies of statements, letters, old contracts, tax documents, anything that could show the difference between my past control and their current actions. I wrote down what Laura said, what David said, even my own reactions. Every word mattered. By late evening, I found a note in David's handwriting tucked between the papers. A list of upcoming payments, work on the property, projected expenses. I had never seen it before. It was as if they were planning the next 6 months of my life without consulting me. I went through the garage, my old workshop. Tools rearranged, shelves relabeled, materials accounted for. Everything shifted, subtle but clear. My routines, my spaces, my familiar corners. They were no longer mine. I realized then, with a knot in my chest, that the situation was growing. What started as a takeover of paperwork was now spreading through my home, through accounts, through authority I had thought untouchable. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't wait. I had to dig deeper. I began checking every folder, every drawer, every email, making phone calls, writing down details, confirming what I could. The unease was heavy, pressing, almost suffocating. It wasn't just that I was losing control, it was that I didn't know the full scope yet, and that uncertainty was worse than any single act of betrayal. Before I went to bed, I looked around the living room. My chair, the couch, the table, still the same pieces I'd lived with for decades, but their ownership felt hollow. Every corner hinted at more changes, more control I hadn't consented to. I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about everything attached to it. And if I wanted to protect what I had left, I had to find out exactly what they were planning. That night, I started to understand the danger in front of me. They weren't just trying to control me. They were quietly taking it all. Every account, every asset, every shred of authority I had once held. And I realized that the next discovery, whatever it was, could change everything. I had been going through the papers all morning when I finally found it. A document tucked between statements and receipts, easy to miss if you weren't looking. It was a mortgage, a big one, taken out on my house, in David's name, and Laura's signature was there too as co-signer. I stared at it, the paper shaking in my hands. My house, the one I had spent 40 years paying off, had been used as collateral for a loan I never agreed to. Every payment, every improvement, every little thing I thought I controlled, it was now part of someone else's plan. I couldn't breathe at first. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. I read it again. They had planned this, every step. Every helpful suggestion, every mild word about taking care of things. They were building a net around me, quietly, and I had walked right into it. Laura had been orchestrating it all. I realized it now, with a sick certainty. She had guided David, nudged him, helped him make the decisions that looked reasonable, even responsible. And behind her calm smile was cold calculation. I went to David then, papers in hand, my voice steady but tight. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. He looked at the document like it was a surprise. "Yeah, Dad, I signed it. We talked about it. We talked about it." I repeated, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "I never signed anything. I never agreed to this." He shrugged, a casual gesture that felt like a punch to the gut. "You gave me the house, Dad. I thought you trusted me to handle things." Trust, the word echoed hollowly in the room. I remembered the day I handed him the deed, thinking it would keep the family together, and now I saw the truth. They weren't just taking control, they had planned my exclusion from the start. I needed to know more. I dug deeper, flipping through old bills, receipts, tax statements. Each one showed subtle changes, movements of money I hadn't noticed before. A contractor paid out of an account I didn't recognize, utility credits rerouted, small amounts at first almost invisible, but adding up to a pattern. I called Mike. His voice came over the line, cautious but firm. "Frank, this isn't just a bad move, this is premeditated. They've been lining everything up. They've been planning this for years," I said, voice low, shaking. "Every little thing, it was a setup." Mike didn't argue. "Yeah, and it's not just money. They've cornered you in your own home. You've got to be careful." I spent the afternoon making a list, checking off every transaction, every transfer. The more I uncovered, the more it became clear. Laura wasn't just controlling the paperwork. She was controlling the narrative, controlling David, controlling everything. I called Rachel Collins, a lawyer I had met years ago on a small property matter. I explained the situation, gave her copies of everything I had. She listened quietly, then said, "Frank, this isn't just mismanagement. They've used the house as collateral. The accounts are manipulated. You need a strategy." Strategy. The word brought a flicker of focus. But before I could ask more, I noticed another letter in the pile, a notice about overdue taxes also in David's name. But it wasn't just taxes. It mentioned liens, insurance issues, and even something about a small investment property I'd once considered renting out. I slammed the table lightly. The rage was rising, but I held it tight. They had taken every angle into account. They had made it impossible to just go back, impossible for David to step away without consequences. This was a trap built meticulously over years. Emily came over in the evening. She saw the stack of papers and the dark look on my face. "Dad," she said softly. "They planned it," I said, voice low. "From the start, they never intended for me to stay. Every step, every suggestion, it was all to push me out. I finally see it." She nodded slowly. "I had a feeling. I just didn't want to believe it." I sank into the chair, the one that had felt like mine for decades now, a stage for someone else's plotting. I whispered to myself, almost a challenge, "If you were me, what would you call this? Betrayal, or something worse?" The words hung in the room, low and heavy. I knew the anger was justified. I knew the hurt, the shock, the indignation, they were all real. But even in that fury, I understood something crucial. The fight had just gotten serious. This wasn't a simple disagreement. This was a planned takeover, every piece deliberate, every step intended to leave me with nothing. Before Emily left, I went back through the papers one more time. Every line confirmed it. Laura's fingerprints were all over it, guiding David, moving the accounts, securing loans, creating a web I had walked into blindly. The house wasn't just his now. It was their operation, their leverage, their prize. And I knew that the next step, whatever it would be, could strip away more than just money or authority. It could take the last shreds of my home, my dignity, my family. I sat there staring at the documents, feeling the full weight of it. Rage, disbelief, betrayal, they burned inside me. And I realized that nothing I thought I understood about my family, about trust, about control, was true. They had planned it all along. And now I had to figure out how to fight back without losing what little foothold remained. I knew one thing with certainty: this was bigger than I imagined. And the next discovery, whatever it was, would change everything. I woke up that morning to a silence that didn't feel like home. The house, my house, had grown colder overnight. Chairs were shifted, papers stacked differently. David and Laura were gone already, off to work or wherever they went. And the note on the kitchen counter told me everything I needed to know. It said, simply, they needed me to find another place to stay. Not a visit, not a discussion, just move out. The tone was polite, almost cheerful, but the meaning was clear. I stared at it for a long time, the coffee growing cold in my hand. I sat down in the living room, letting it sink in. They had cornered me. Slowly, methodically, the home I had turned over in trust had become theirs entirely. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't even family here anymore. I was an obstacle. I thought of calling Mike, my old partner, but the words caught in my throat. What could he do? What could anyone do when the people closest to you, your own blood, had drawn the lines this clearly? I felt that old, familiar weight of being alone, but heavier this time. Emily called later that afternoon. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, not since the mortgage issue. Her voice was soft, worried. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "I'm managing," I said, though it sounded hollow even to me. They want me to move out. I guess this is where I stand now." There was a pause on the line. Then she said carefully, "You're not alone. You can stay with me if you need to." I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. "That's not the point, Em. That's not the problem. The problem is, I don't even know where I belong anymore. That's the first time in my life I've felt like I really don't have a place to go." She didn't argue, she just listened. Her quiet gave me a little grip, a thread to hold on to. But it wasn't enough to make the house feel mine again. I wandered through the rooms, touching the edges of the counters, the walls, the door frames, trying to remember what had made them mine at all. It was all gone, in a way that couldn't be returned with a phone call or a promise. David and Laura had been careful. Every move I made, every question I asked, they anticipated. The bills had been shifted, the keys subtly rearranged, little notes left to push me toward the door. I began to realize I wasn't just being asked to leave. I was being edged out. Tested maybe, or warned. The afternoon stretched long and gray. I made a list of things I still had access to, things I could still claim. But it was short, almost laughably so. The accounts, the locks, the contracts all had slipped into their control. The room felt smaller with each discovery, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. I checked my voicemail. A few messages from service providers, reminders, nothing threatening, but every one of them had David's name attached. It hit me again, the isolation. I couldn't even call to fix a simple account without passing through him. I was locked out in every way that mattered. By evening, I had walked through the house twice more, circling the same rooms, my pace slower each time. The air smelled faintly of the dinners they had cooked without me, of conversations I wasn't allowed to hear. The emptiness was heavy. I felt it pressing on my chest, a weight of something I hadn't felt since my first night alone in the city after leaving the force. I called Emily again before bed. She listened while I explained, carefully, how they had shut me out. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't lecture. She just said, "We'll figure it out together, Dad. You're not invisible, not to me." It helped, that little thread of connection. A small thing, a warmth against the cold. But it didn't change the reality. By nightfall, I realized I was truly on the edge. I had no real authority in my own home, no control over what was mine. And tomorrow, they expected me to step aside, to leave. I went to bed that night with the feeling heavy in my chest. That was the first time I'd ever truly not known where to go. The house I had given in trust, the family I had tried to hold together. They were slipping away, and there was nothing I could do tonight to stop it. I lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the heating, the distant sound of cars on the street. I was alone, truly alone, and the walls around me seemed to whisper the same thing. This was the new reality. I had to find a way forward, but for the first time in my life, I had no idea where that path even began. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the first real tests of how much I had lost and how much I was willing to fight to get back. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was worried exactly, but because my mind kept turning over the same thought. They thought they had me cornered. David and Laura thought I'd folded, that I'd left my home quietly, and that I'd accepted being shut out. But they were wrong. The next morning, Rachel Collins came over. She had that calm, precise way of walking into a room, like she already knew the score. She carried a folder of papers and a laptop. We sat in the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, and she started going through everything I had collected, the mortgage statements, the account records, the notes Laura left lying around. "Frank," she said, "they've been sloppy in a few key places, not enough to fool you completely, but enough that we can make it work in your favor." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a flicker of control I hadn't felt in weeks. Rachel pointed to a line in the contract where David had co-signed something without the proper disclosure. Another document showed that Laura had rerouted some of the bills without notifying you, which technically counted as misrepresentation. Step by step, she laid it out. Every small manipulation, every attempt to edge me out, every threat they had left gaps. And now, with her guidance, those gaps became weapons. We started planning, not shouting, not frantic calls, just careful, deliberate moves. I made copies of every document, every notice, every email. Rachel explained how and when to present them. The timing would matter. We couldn't just accuse, we had to show the chain of evidence, the pattern of control, the deception. That evening, Rachel and I went to David's place. He wasn't expecting us. He and Laura were setting the table for dinner, laughing over something I couldn't hear, thinking I was still on the outside looking in. I felt the old knot of resentment tighten, but I held it steady. I didn't need anger right now. I needed precision. Rachel started. She laid out the evidence calmly, clearly. David, Laura, she said, Frank has every right to access his own property and accounts. There are actions here that need immediate correction. David's smile faltered first. Laura's calm composure wavered. I could see it in the way her hands tightened on the tablecloth, how she blinked a little too fast. They had counted on me being passive, but here I was, documents in hand, supported, firm. We went through it line by line. Every loan, every rerouted payment, every notice of overdue taxes, everything was on display. Rachel didn't argue, she showed. I didn't shout, I presented. The room grew tight with tension, and slowly, the truth became unavoidable. David tried to interrupt once, muttering that some of the papers were misunderstood, but Rachel didn't let him. Laura opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. She knew the holes, the missteps, the trail we had uncovered, and now she couldn't cover them up. I stayed quiet through most of it, watching them unravel piece by piece. The look on David's face when he realized the contracts he'd signed, or hadn't properly disclosed, could be challenged was almost comical if it weren't so tense. Laura's eyes flicked toward me, the old authority she thought she had gone out the window. By the time we left that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control, not complete control, but enough to breathe, to plan, to know I wasn't done. I hadn't just survived their games. I had turned the tables. Later, at home, I reviewed the papers again. Each line, each clause, each notice I had documented became a marker of my regained footing. Rachel had given me the path, but I had walked it. The evidence was clear, undeniable, and now, finally, I had the leverage. I called Emily. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and steady. "Dad," she asked. They thought I was finished, I said, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the words. But they were wrong. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carries relief and hope. "I knew you weren't going to let them win." I looked out the window at the house across the street, at the porch and the lawn, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time. I was back in the fight. The pressure hadn't gone away, but the fear had lifted. I could see the pieces clearly now. The next steps would matter, every move carefully measured, but for the first time since this started, I wasn't on the defensive. I was ready to take it all back, piece by piece, and no one could pretend I had already lost. They had underestimated me. They had thought the game was theirs, but the truth was out, and now it was my turn. The house was quiet that morning. I walked through it slowly, room by room, taking stock of everything that had shifted and settled back into place. The papers were in order, the accounts corrected, and the keys were back where they belonged. Rachel had done her part, and now, finally, I could do mine. David and Laura had left town for the week, giving me space to breathe and think. I sat in the living room, the sun spilling across the old rug, and I felt something I hadn't in months. Ease, not relief exactly, but a calm that carried the weight of the fight behind me. The house felt like mine again. Not because I had taken it back with anger, but because order had returned. Emily came by in the afternoon. She didn't rush in or chatter. She just walked through the door with that steady, careful smile I remembered from her childhood. We sat in the kitchen with mugs of coffee, letting the silence stretch for a moment before she spoke. "I'm glad you're back, Dad," she said softly. I nodded, taking a slow sip. Me too, Me too." We talked about small things first, the garden, the old fence that needed patching, a crooked window latch. Then, slowly, we moved to what had really happened. I told her about the documents, the missteps, the legal steps Rachel had guided me through. I didn't dwell on the anger or humiliation. There was no need. She listened, eyes steady, offering only gentle nods or the occasional quiet question. By the time she left, the sun had dipped low, painting the room in gold and amber. I stayed sitting at the table, the quiet stretching around me. It felt good to be able to think about my home without a knot in my chest, to plan meals or fix a leaky faucet, or just sit and listen to the sound of the neighborhood waking and settling around me. I spent the next few days checking the house, running through every lock, every bill, every account. Rachel had ensured the legal side was secure, and I made it my own again. There was satisfaction in that, the kind that comes from taking back what should never have been lost. It wasn't flashy or loud, it was steady, solid. Mine. Emily stopped by again a few days later. She helped me sort through old photos in the attic, the ones I hadn't looked at since I moved in with David. We laughed softly at the awkward hairstyles, the faded baseball uniforms, the snapshots of vacations that had felt like a different life. That day I realized something important. I hadn't just regained my home. I had regained connection, small and careful as it might be, with the part of my family that mattered most. The evening came, and I made dinner for myself, something simple: roast chicken, potatoes, carrots. I set the table just the way I liked it. I ate slowly, listening to the quiet, feeling the warmth in my chest that came from standing on my own 2 feet again. The fight was over. The house was safe, my dignity intact. I thought of Mike, of Rachel, of Emily, and the truth settled around me. Life didn't go back to how it had been. There were scars, reminders of what had happened, of what I had almost lost. But the wounds were not fresh now. They were edges I could touch and remember, not edges that cut. I spent the weekend working in the yard. I trimmed the shrubs, raked the leaves, patched a broken corner of the porch. The work was steady, practical, and honest. Each small task reminded me that I could still care for something, nurture it, make it right. The house felt alive again. So did I. I called Emily once more just to hear her voice. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. "It is," I said. "It really is." She laughed softly. "Good. That's all I wanted to know." As the week ended, I took my usual walk down the quiet streets, waving to neighbors I had known for decades. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of place and belonging that hadn't felt this steady in a long time. I carried the past with me. Yes, but I walked lighter now. The weight of fear and betrayal lifted. Back at home, I sat in my chair by the window and looked out at the yard I had worked on, the trees I had pruned, the house standing firm. It was mine, again, in a way that mattered. The walls weren't just walls. They were proof that I had endured, that I could endure. Life wouldn't be perfect. No life is. But this one was mine, steady and true. I could plan small trips, enjoy quiet mornings, fix broken things without fear, and sit down to dinner knowing my place was secure. I felt older, yes, but stronger, not invincible, not carefree, but whole enough to move forward. I leaned back, hands resting on the arms of the chair, and let the evening stretch. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the house grew soft in shadows. For the first time in a long time, I felt a quiet peace. If you've listened this far, thank you for staying with me. There's more life to live in these rooms, and I'm glad to share a little of it with you.